The longship slides through the grey water of the Ouse like a blade through silk. Shields line the hull. A raven banner snaps in the cold wind. On the riverbank, a city exhales smoke from 100 hearths, and the men gripping those oars are not raiders. They are coming home. You think you know the Vikings. Horned helmets, burning monasteries, screaming raids on helpless coasts. But here is the truth that most history books quietly skip over. The Norse did not just plunder England. They built a city in its heart. They paved its streets, traded its goods, named its neighborhoods, and raised their children in its shadow. That city still exists. You may know it as York. They called it Jorvik. And at its peak, around the year 900 AD, it was one of the most cosmopolitan, economically powerful, and densely populated urban centers in all of Northern Europe. This is the story of that city and the world that vanished beneath its mud, waiting over 1,000 years to be found again. To understand how a Viking capital rose in the middle of England, you need to go back to the autumn of 866 AD. The Great Heathen Army, a coalition of Norse warriors so large that the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle simply ran out of adjectives for it, crossed the North Sea and marched inland. They took Eboracum, the old Roman and Anglian city the English had built on the ruins of Eboracum, one of the most important Roman fortresses in Britannia. The timing was almost theatrical. Two rival Northumbrian kings, Ella and Osbert, were locked in a civil war when the Danes arrived. They called a truce, united their forces, and attempted to retake the city on the 21st of March, 867. They failed. Both kings fell in the fighting. Northumbria, for all practical purposes, was now Norse territory. But here is the part that never makes it into the movies. What came next was not occupation. It was transformation. The Vikings did not simply garrison Eboracum and move on. They settled. They sent for families. They built. Over the following decades, the city changed its name, its layout, its economy, and its very smell. Jorvik, as it became known, was laid out in a grid of narrow timber-framed streets running down to the river. The main commercial artery was called Coppergate, the street of the cup-makers, from the Old Norse Kopari, and it was lined shoulder to shoulder with workshops, stalls and homes where craft and commerce happened simultaneously, sometimes in the same room. Walk down Coppergate in 900 AD and your boots would sink into a soft, organic mulch of compressed straw, wood shavings, animal dung, food waste, and the accumulated debris of daily life. The street itself was made of wooden planks laid over boggy ground, the same waterlogged soil that centuries later would preserve everything perfectly. The smell would hit you before anything else. Not the romantic wood smoke of a fantasy, something more complex, more alive. Fish guts and tanning hides, hot iron from the smith's forge, fresh bread from a nearby oven, the sharp reek of a latrine pit only a few feet behind someone's back wall. and the sound. Jorvik, at its height, had a population historians now estimate somewhere between 10 and 15,000 people. Enormous for its era, larger than most English cities would be for centuries to come. Every language in the North Atlantic world washed through its alleyways. Old Norse, obviously, but also Old English, Frisian, a smattering of Irish Gaelic from Norse-Irish settlers, and the occasional Arabic phrase traded in from the silver routes that connected Scandinavia to the Islamic world through the river systems of Russia and the Caspian. Archaeologists excavating Coppergate in the 1970s and 1980s found silk from Byzantium. They found amber from the Baltic. They found a cowrie shell that had travelled from the Red Sea to a workshop in northern England, probably worn as a charm or trinket by someone who had no idea of the extraordinary distance it had crossed. The craftsmanship that emerged from Jorvik's workshops was genuinely extraordinary. Jorvik's amber workers were among the finest in the Norse world, turning raw Baltic resin into beads, pendants and gaming pieces with a precision that still astonishes modern analysts. Its leatherworkers produced shoes of a quality that rivals anything found elsewhere in 10th century Europe. The wood-turners on Coppergate, those cup makers who gave the street its name, spun bowls and vessels on pole lathes, creating objects of elegant, almost minimal beauty that could pass for modern Scandinavian design without anyone blinking twice. The city had a mint. It struck its own coins. This was not a camp. It was a civilization. Here is the detail that tends to stop people mid-sentence. Archaeologists found the remains of intestinal parasites in the latrine deposits at Coppergate. Specifically, eggs from whipworm and roundworm, preserved in the anaerobic mud for over 1,000 years. From those eggs, scientists were able to reconstruct something astonishing: the diet of an ordinary Jorvik resident. They ate beef, mutton, and pork. They ate freshwater fish from the rivers and herring from the sea. They consumed significant quantities of wild plants, including blackberries, slowberries, and wild celery. They had dental wear patterns consistent with eating coarse, grain-heavy bread. The past is not abstract when it has a digestive system. The political world around Jorvik shifted constantly. The Viking kingdom of Northumbria was never truly stable. Norse kings and Anglo-Saxon kings fought over it, negotiated over it, and occasionally tried to pray over it into compliance. Eric Bloodaxe, a name that would look absurd on a business card but somehow suited its owner perfectly, was the last Viking king to hold Jorvik. He was expelled twice and returned twice, a figure of violent, restless ambition who had reportedly driven his own brothers out of Norway before being driven out of England. He fell at the Battle of Stainmore in 954, ambushed on a moorland road in the Pennines. With his passing, the independent Viking kingdom of Northumbria ended. Jorvik was absorbed into a unified England under King Edred. The Norse era of the city closed, not with a sea battle or a siege, but with a man cut down on a windswept road in the north of England, the last king of a world that was already fading. But the city did not disappear. It continued. The Norse street names survived: Gudrumgate, Micklegate, Gillygate, Stonegate. The suffix gate, meaning street or road, is Old Norse, from gata. Every time someone in York today gives directions using those names, they are speaking Viking, 12 centuries removed. The river trade continued. The craftsmen continued. The identity of the place, shaped by a century of Norse habitation, proved more durable than the kingdom that created it. And then, in the 1970s, something remarkable happened beneath a chocolate factory. The Rowntree Company's facility at Coppergate was being demolished to make way for a shopping centre. Archaeologists were granted a narrow window to excavate before the bulldozers moved in, and what they found beneath the surface was essentially a time capsule, preserved by the same waterlogged soil that had made Jorvik's streets so unpleasant to walk in 1,000 years earlier. Timber structures, leather shoes, textile fragments. The seeds, the parasites, the silk, the cowrie shell. The entire dig, conducted between 1976 and 1981, became one of the most significant urban excavations in European history. The finds formed the backbone of the Jorvik Viking Centre, which opened in 1984 and allowed visitors to travel slowly in a small car past reconstructed workshop scenes through a recreation of Coppergate as it appeared in 975 AD. It remains one of the most visited heritage attractions in Britain. The mud of York held a secret for 1,000 years. It held the smell of a fish market, the shape of a woodturner's bowl, the microscopic ghost of a parasite, and the faint echo of a language that still haunts the street signs above your head. Jorvik was not a footnote. It was the blueprint for a city, a living, breathing, arguing, trading, stinking, extraordinary city, built by people the world spent centuries dismissing as little more than raiders with good boats. They were so much more than that. And now you know it. If this kind of history, the real kind, the kind that smells like something and leaves evidence in the mud, is the history you've been looking for, then you are exactly where you belong. Subscribe to History Recreated, hit that notification bell, and tell us in the comments, which city from the ancient or medieval world would you most want to walk through just for one day? We read every single one. See you in the next chapter.